Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. I wanted to get another quick video in. I've enjoyed presenting the PSP and DS RPGs or top 5 games so much that I figure the Game Boy Advance definitely deserves its own episode. This is the handheld that got me back into portable gaming proper, and I fell in love with the system when it came out. I didn't pick it up until it had the revision. And I please advise you guys, if you don't have a Game Boy Advance or if you're getting into collecting for the system, you definitely want to get the SP, the fold-up model, and you want to get the one with the brighter screen. I believe it's the AGS 101. I could be wrong, but it has got the brighter setting for the screen. It makes a world of difference. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started on some of the top games for the Game Boy Advance. And as always, I want to get out of the way real quick. Not that they don't deserve more attention, but everybody has heard of Zelda, the Mario games. Everybody's heard of Kirby, Metroid. They are all fantastic games and well worth your time. Zelda needs no introduction. Excellent games here in the Game Boy Advance. These are actually a couple of Game Boy Color games that are playable on the Advance. Minish Cap being one of my favorite Zeldas ever, and the Kirby games are always fantastic, very nice platformers. The Metroid games are some of the best 2D side-scrollers ever made. They are so much fun on the Advance here. Zero Mission is fantastic, and this one really takes me back. This released the same day as Prime, so not only were we getting a brand new fantastic 3D Metroid on the home system, we got a kind of 2D companion to go along with it on the Game Boy. I wish they would do that again. I guess now with the Switch, having a handheld and a console in one is not possible, but what a great time it was to get a brand new console Metroid and a badass 2D Metroid on the same day. Great memories. Fusion is an excellent game. In that same league of games that are definitely worth mentioning as top games, but most people know of them, have heard of them. Castlevania is a well-known series. This was the continuation of the Castlevania series, kind of post Symphony of the Night. So this is the same kind of Metroidvania style gameplay found in Symphony of the Night, continuing on a handheld. Circle of the Moon was the first release very early on in the Game Boy Advance's life. And then we got Aria of Sorrow and Harmony of Dissonance. Now these were available as single games, obviously. The covers are here. This is a double pack, came out a little bit later on. I was a fool and traded in my original copies. I really still kick myself in the ass for doing that. But I made sure to at least get the double pack, so I have both of them still. Near perfection as far as 2D platformers go. I go back and forth with Metroid and Castlevania on the handhelds, which are better. They're just so damn good. And this was a brilliant trilogy, and it was followed up with a brand new trilogy on the DS in the form of a sequel to Aria of Sorrow, which was Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and then Order of Ecclesia. And I was looking so much forward to another trilogy of 2D Castlevania games on the 3DS. Sadly, it wasn't to be. That's enough to bring a tear to the eye. It's so sad because these were just amazing games. So moving on to kind of like the top 5 aspect, people have called me out on this in the comments. It's not really a top 5, but I can't help myself. I start talking about games and I can't stop. But I cannot start any list on any Game Boy Advance video off without talking about Ninja 5.0. I gush about this every chance I get. One of my favorite games of all time. And I'll kind of say why this means so much to me personally. Back when my son Zach was very young, I had to go to work and he was left alone with his grandma, or sometimes his mom was home, and he started playing my Game Boy Advance. And at this time he was really young and he really hadn't gotten into the games too much, but on his own he picked up the Game Boy Advance and started playing this game. And I got home from work one day and he had kind of like just sped run through the entire first level and beat the first 3 levels, and it was just running through this game and swinging the grappling hook like a pro and taking out enemies and saving hostages. And every dad has those moments where, like, taking him on his first hunting trip and getting his first kill, if that's your thing, or watching your son get a touchdown in a football game, or whatever the case may be. My dad moment was watching my son plow through Ninja 5.0 like a pro. That was my father and son moment. So this game is brilliant. Very expensive and hard to find. Sadly, I wish everybody could play this game and own it because it's just that good. A combination of Shinobi and Bionic Commando with some excellent physics-based grappling hook gameplay that you can use to ascend the levels vertically and swing around, open up doors. You're going to go in and kill bad guys, save hostages, ninja power-ups are available. This game has got it all. The gameplay is rock solid, great boss battles. One of the best Game Boy Advance action games to be found. It's just sad it was so scarce when it first came out. Now for some RPGs on the Game Boy Advance, my favorite strategy RPG series of all time, Fire Emblem. It's a toss-up between Fire Emblem and Shining Force. I also go back and forth on that, but these were the first Fire Emblem games to come out here in the States, and they still hold up very well. far as RPGs go on the Game Boy Advance, Fire Emblem is at the top of the class in my opinion. Some of my favorite games on the system. And these are the first appearance of Fire Emblem games in the States here. And I fell in love with the series right away. I wasn't too familiar with like tons of strategy RPGs at the time. This was back in the early 2000s. I know I loved Shining Force, and there was some on the PS2, but Fire Emblem is what really got me back into the genre in full swing. I fell in love with the character development. The idea that if a character died in the game, it would die for good. And you guys know the drill by now. Strategy RPGs are kind of like top-down, grid-based, almost like a game of checkers. Very strategic. You got to think about your enemy placement. You got to think about your character placement, rather. And they're just so much fun to play. They have amazing stories. Production value was through the roof on the Game Boy Advance here. I was blown away by immersing myself into a 40-hour game on a handheld. Because at the time, the Game Boy Advance really stepped it up, and these games are amazing. Tactical RPG, perfection, a great series, a great start to a series, and my introduction into the Fire Emblem series. While we're on the subject of RPGs, I was really on a roll with the Game Boy Advance, and the game that actually pushed me to buy the console was when Lunar Legend was released on the handheld. Now you gotta remember, back then, the idea of having a portable version of my favorite game of all time, it just blew my mind. Nowadays it's not so crazy because you can get Lunar on an iPad or play it on a PSP, but back then this was insane. I went out and bought the system immediately and got the game, and you know, I wasn't disappointed. If I came into this today's day expecting a nice port of my favorite game of all time, I'd be disappointed, because it's very much a trimmed down version of the classic Sega CD game. But you know what? At the time, it has the characters, it's got similar music, the story's been trimmed, and it's been changed even further from the PlayStation version. So almost a different game, but still the same. Not a letdown. Lunar Legend is a great RPG, very traditional, very story-driven. It still gives you the Alex becoming a Dragon Master and saving the world vibe, just on a smaller scale. But I was very happy to have the Game Boy Advance, and this was my first game, and I still love it to this day dearly. So after I finished Lunar Legend, I immediately got to work on another RPG. And at the time, I bought Golden Sun, and this was getting really good reviews. And this is what completely just blew me away with the Game Boy Advance. I was completely 100% in after this point. The graphics in this game were just completely mind-blowing. The battles looked amazing. Some of the best graphics I'd ever seen at the time, hands down, especially on a handheld. It looked so good. The story was really nicely done. Great characters, the synergy, which is kind of the theme or hook in this game. Using this energy that you have, you can solve puzzles using like a giant hand and moving stuff out of the way. And you've got a djinn system where you can combine these different djinns in your battle system to get different spells and different powers. And overall, it was done by Camelot, who did the Shining Force games, and they did a fantastic job. Golden Sun changed everything that I thought about handheld RPGs and what they could be. At the time, this was just too good to be true, a massive game. And what's cool about the Golden Sun games, and I didn't really know about this because I didn't really read too much on it, I just bought the second one as soon as it came out. The second one continues your playthrough of your first game via password, but it flips the script, and now instead of playing the good guys like you do in the first game, in the second game you're now playing as the bad guys pursuing the party that you played through in the first game. So that's a very cool and underutilized concept in RPGs. It's a great idea and it works well, and I really commend this series for being so ahead of its time, so enjoyable. And there's a third entry on the DS that is just another massive game. Golden Sun is a series I'd love to see continue. I'd love to see new entry in the 3DS because this series is just that damn good. Completely ahead of its time, amazing RPGs and must-owns. Being a massive Tales fan that I am, I was ecstatic to get Tales of Phantasia. And if I am not mistaken, this is a port of a Super Famicom game that never got released here. I could be wrong. But what another excellent game, and showing off the roots of the series. It's amazing to see just how much the combat has evolved, because at the time, the Tales of series was the odd man out for having a battle system that was action-based. For RPGs, it was always turn-based. So this was a real treat to get to play something like this, and it just changed the way I looked at RPGs, having that full control. Not that I don't like turn-based battle systems, but it was really nice to have kind of an action game when it came to the battle system, surrounded by typical RPG elements, overworld maps, great storylines. The Tales games are amazing, and I absolutely love and appreciate being able to check out the origins of the series here on the Game Boy Advance. A couple of RPGs that I really am quite fond of on the Game Boy Advance came out later in the life cycle, and initially what caught my attention was the kind of foil covers, the bright silver, the embossed lettering. Didn't know much about them. I saw Way Forward did Sigma Star Saga, so I was in right away. Way Forward, amazing sprite work. They just do fantastic work. Sigma Star Saga is very unique in the fact that it combines two of my favorite genres into one game, which is RPGs and shoot 'em ups. Now this is a very story-driven game, and what's cool about this is not only is it a very unique idea, I really enjoyed the story. You're going to be going undercover into the Krill enemy forces. You're going to be outfitted with a parasite, which is kind of like sits on top of your head, and it like digs into your back, and it gives you superhuman strength and some other abilities and advantages that the Krill have over the humans. And you're undercover, and you're going to be trying to feed information back to the humans, and it's just an awesome concept. And the battle system is really cool. It really works for this game. It's got the branching story paths, multiple endings, but what's cool about this is the top-down exploration parts. You're going to be exploring planets and shooting enemies and exploring things like an RPG would. Beautiful graphics, by the way. When you go into the battles, you're summoned to your ship, and it turns into like a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. And you kill the enemies, get experience points, level up. So I just thought that was a really cool concept. Not the first time it's been done, but it was the first time that I had experienced something like it. And I think that the shoot 'em up and RPG elements blend perfectly to create a really awesome game. The graphics are top-notch. Rebel Star Tactical Command is another strategy RPG with an alien invasion theme where you're taking out aliens, and I really enjoyed the gameplay in this. I love a good alien story, and I thought the tactical elements were very well done. The story was on point. Everything about this game screams quality, and if you are a strategy RPG fan, definitely check out Rebel Star Tactical Command. Sega was definitely on a roll with the Game Boy Advance. We got an update to one of my favorite Genesis games of all time, Gunstar Heroes. This is Gunstar Superheroes, and this game doesn't get enough credit, man. Pushing the Game Boy Advance to the max. Sprites are filling the screen, explosions are everywhere, very action-packed, just like the Genesis original. The gameplay in this, if you played the original Gunstar Heroes, is very chaotic. It is a action game through and through, very arcadey. The storyline is kind of all over the place, but the gameplay is rock solid. Jumping, shooting, kicking, juggling enemies, keeping all these combos going. It's just a hell of a time. A great update that definitely needs some more love. It's not that expensive, so definitely check out Gunstar Superheroes. The Genesis original is skyrocketing. This one has just stayed hidden. So if you want to experience Gunstar Heroes, check out Superheroes in the Game Boy Advance. It is well worth your time. An amazing follow-up. Astro Boy was another amazing action game on the Game Boy Advance. And once again, I don't know if Sega made a deal with the devil to get these games looking this good in the system, but the gameplay is kind of similar in certain aspects to Gunstar, where you're going to be fighting hordes of enemies, sprites taking up the entire screen, juggling them, knocking them into other enemies, creating chaos, sprites bouncing everywhere. There's side-scrolling shooting levels where you can power up Astro Boy and shoot lasers out of his fingertips. The combat system is just amazing, and like I said, some of the best games on the handheld. These are just action games done right, done to perfection. As far as action games go on the Game Boy Advance, top of the class and highly recommended. Another couple great updates on the Game Boy Advance. Altered Beast Guardian of the Realms. And I gotta say, Altered Beast being my first Genesis game I ever played, coming with the pack-in, I didn't know this game existed, and it just hit me one day on the shelf when I was browsing through the game store, and I was like, holy shit, Altered Beast Guardian of the Realms. Went home and did a little bit of research on it before I bought it, and I found out that this is just more of the original, more transformations, more beasts, more levels, longer levels. Just a great arcade action that I come to expect from the original here in handheld form, and this is a really solid follow-up. Not a lot of people talk about this game, but Altered Beast is not the most deep game, it's not the most long game, it's not going to change your life, but it's very solid arcade action. I enjoyed the beast transformations, and the good thing about this is, in the original Genesis game, it seemed like you transform into the beast, and then a few more screens later, you're right at the boss. This game gives you a little bit more time to enjoy playing as the beast and its different attack forms. Really cool transformations. This is a great sequel, a great update to an old Genesis game. Advanced Guardian Heroes, it kind of gutted me because Guardian Heroes is one of my favorite games of all time on the Saturn, and I really enjoy the new Code of Princess on the 3DS. I shouldn't say new, it's a couple years old now, but done by the same team. This game kind of let me down, man. It's still a very enjoyable game, don't get me wrong. It's just not up to the brilliant standards set by the original Guardian Heroes. Once again, Treasure does a great job on this. The battle system is really cool. Doing your kicks and your punches and juggling enemies and some returning faces from the original game. It just didn't have the same magic, and it was missing, but taken on its own, it's still a really good game. Just don't expect anything on the level of Gunstar Heroes. And also, if you're a fan of House of the Dead, forget Typing of the Dead. I hear people talking about that all the time. Mother effing Pinball of the Dead. Now this is a great use of the House of the Dead universe. Very cool tables rendered after levels of House of the Dead. Zombies, blood, great pinball action. You really can't go wrong. I'm a big fan of pinball games, and I absolutely enjoyed Pinball of the Dead. Seeing some returning bosses and characters. If you're a fan of House of the Dead, definitely check out Pinball of the Dead. I've got to mention the Klonoa series. I'm such a huge fan of the original Klonoa on the PlayStation and the Part 2 on PlayStation 2. Being the first kind of 2.5D games that I had played, I fell in love with the graphical style and presentation. Now, while this ditches the 2.5D aspect of the PlayStation games, what these are very traditional, very solid, very colorful platformers, and they're a lot of fun, man. They just have a wholesome goodness to them. Klonoa is a really cool character. While it might ditch the 2.5D graphical perspective, it keeps the same rock-solid gameplay and attacks. You're still going to be grabbing onto those enemies and either throwing them or using them to jump up higher to reach platforms. The Klonoa spirit is alive and well in both of these games. Very solid platformers. If you're a fan of Klonoa, then you've got a lot to love on the Game Boy Advance for sure. So I hope you guys have enjoyed taking a look at some of my favorite games in the Game Boy Advance. The handheld, in my opinion, has aged pretty well. It's much more than just a souped up Super Nintendo. You just pop the game in, straight to it, no menu, no picking network, no choosing friend list. Pop the game in, and you're right there playing immediately. It's a great handheld to go back and play and experience some of these old classics. There's a lot of great updates in the system. There's a ton of great games. I just wanted to share a few of my favorites. I want to thank you guys for watching. I promise, the Xbox Buyer's Guide is next. Look for it in the coming days. Thank you guys for watching. As always, Games of War is nothing without you.